Okay, good evening, everyone. Here we are Monday night. It's just after Rosh Chodesh Elul. By now, Moshe Rabbeinu is definitely on the mountain. We mentioned Shabbos afternoon, the big shaila, if when Moshe went up for the third set of 40 days, was it on Chof Tes of, was it on Lamed of, was it on Lamed Elul, and all different ways of calculating that in order to get 40 complete days from when he went up until he descended on Yom Kippur with the second Luchas. If you say he went up today, the first day of Elul, the only way to get 40 complete days, you're going to have to do some acrobats. You're going to have to say that Elul that year was 30 days. You'll also have to say he went up in the beginning of Aleph Elul by night. And also he came down at the end of Yom Kippur. And that way, and only that way, can you get 40 complete days by saying he went up on Aleph Elul. But we discussed different opinions on Shabbos. The point is, by now, by tonight, Moshe is definitely on the mountain. However, tonight's discussion is not about Elul. If you came here to hear some Musar, you're in the wrong place. You're in the wrong place. I don't give Musar. You know, if I chastise anyone, it's myself. I'm often hoarse. People ask why. I say, I scream. So I say, what are you screaming your students for? I say, who said screaming at the students? I'm screaming at myself. Anyhow, but I think was it the Rushner who told the Kaliner Chassidim, they used to daven with a lot of noise. He said, Will schreien, wilt ihr schreien, schreit, aber stiller heit. You want to scream, scream, or do it quietly. Do it quietly. Anyhow, so tonight's discussion is a legal discussion. It's not about ethics or repentance or self-introspection. It's a halachic legal discussion, not monetary law, not civil law. This is not bein adam lechaveri, bein adam lamakim. The question is a very general question. What's the deal with Rabbinic Judaism? I mean, right? Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Like they say, if Moshe Rabbeinu would walk in and see what we do, he would say, what? What's this? What's this? Mazeh. So this is the shaila about Rabbinic Judaism. And the title of the shir was the Avnei Nezer is attacked by his dearest student. We're going to go on a journey. We will go on a journey throughout quite a few places in Shas and Poskim. And hopefully it'll be interesting. If you don't find it interesting, please keep that to yourself. So we do have a specific area that we want to zoom in on in Rabbinic Judaism. But in order to get there, an introduction is in order, is required. Quite an introduction, okay? So we're going to build over here. We're going to build... our discussion takes place on the, what's the top of the building? The penthouse. That's where the problem is it's in floor 102. And it's going to take some time to get there. Some introductions. This week's Parsha Shoftim. And a few mitzvahs are given here, which are not really found in the Torah before. Extremely fundamental. There's a mitzvah aseh that the Beis Din HaGodol in Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin, gives information, you must follow them. A mitzvah aseh vasisa to do alpi the way Yerucha, the way they teach you. And then there's a lois aseh, lois asur. You may not stray from what they tell you right or left. What comes out of the mouths of the Beis Din HaGodol, of the authoritative central court, the Supreme Court, generation to generation, what they say is the final word, unless they themselves change their mind. But what they say is the final word, and there's a mitzvah aseh for everyone to abide by their instructions, and a mitzvah lois aseh not to violate. That's what it says in this week's parsha. So, who says you have to listen to the rabbis? God. However, not so fast. There is a fundamental debate between the Rambam and the Ramban. The Rambam writes in the beginning of Hilchos Mamrim, he states very clearly that there are three elements to the oral law. The Torah Shebaal Peh we know, the written law that we know. The oral law, what the rabbis tell us, there are three elements, says the Rambam. Number one, whatever the Chachamim tell us is a tradition going back, student to teacher, all the way back to Holy Moses, to what Moshe Rabbeinu heard from God himself. That can be known as Halacha l'Moshe Misinai, it goes back to Moshe. Or Mipi Shmua, it's the explanations, the elaborations God gave to Moses when he was on Har Sinai. As the Rambam writes in his introduction to his halachas, that the Torah b'pirusha nitna, the Torah was given with its pirush. When Moshe was on Har Sinai, what was he doing? He wasn't eating and drinking, right? He wasn't eating in restaurants every night. There's no food over there. The Eibishter was telling him the oral explanations, the pirush of Torah Shebaal Peh. Everything, the explanations of many of the mitzvahs. And many of those details were passed down, and it's called Bipi Shmua. It's the tradition, it's a Kabbalah. Some things are referred to as Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Gemara, Gemiri law, different explanations. Okay, yeah, we say it was given by Sinai. Yeah, similar. Okay. So that's all element number one. Says the Rambam, element number two is when the Chachamim of the generation are interpreting the Torah. Either through the 13 middos of Rabbi Yishmael or the 32 middos of the other Tana, and there's many other ways, many other klolim. There are many other klolim of how to be Dearest the psukim. The Medrash Tanchuma says in Parashas Kisisa, when Moshe was in Har Sinai, the Eibishter gave him a whole tool set, a whole set of tools to pass on to future Rabbanim. Many of these tools are not the interpretations themselves, but the ways through which you can reach the true interpretation. And very often these tools can work against each other, and that's why Chachamim argue. Do I make a kal v'chomer? Do I not like the kal v'chomer? A hekesh, not a hekesh, because all these things. Are you doirish the extra hay, the vav, or this, or dibra Torah, koloshim, b'nei adam, all these ideas, fine. So, says the Rambam, this is element number two, when the Chachamim are being doirish, they're expounding, they're explaining. So, it's them telling it to us, but they're telling us what the Chumash believes, what the Torah says, what's biblical, what's Dearest. Whether this act is prohibited, whether this thing is chayiv, what punishment it is, it's they're discovering, we'll use the word, they're discovering through the tools that have been passed down, what is the Torah stance on this issue. Fine. That's area number two. Mm-hmm. Element number three, says the Rambam, when Chachamim say they create their own mitzvah. Megillah, Chanukah, when Brachas, Netilas Yadayim, Neres Shabbos, etc., Avelis, or when they create a siyag, a safeguard. Don't have chicken and milk, you might come to have meat and milk. Muktzah on Shabbos, and etc., etc. We all know that there's no limit to the siyag, the safeguards. Says the Rambam, even the minhagim, even the customs ordained by the Chachamim, if it comes from the central Bezdin, says the Rambam, this is the third element. Mitzvos, safeguards, like Isurim D'rabanan, and the minhagim, says the Rambam, that's element number three. Says the Rambam, all three elements are all backed up by the two biblical commands of Va'asiso, you should follow the rabbis, and don't stray from what they say. If you don't accept the words of the Chachamim on any of these three things, you violate these Dearest. That's the Rambam. The Ramban, in the beginning of Sefer HaMitzvos, the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvos, the Ramban wrote critique, right, Hasagas on the Sefer HaMitzvos, and on the first, in the beginning, all the way in the beginning, in the first Shirish, the Rambam, before he delineates his count of the 613 mitzvahs, he has his principles of how he gets there. So the Ramban takes issue with this Rambam, and the Ramban says, what? According to the Rambam, any D'rabanan you violate, if someone eats chicken and milk, they're violating a Dearest of Lo Yisasur. When you eat the chicken and milk, you should get Malkus. Anytime someone violates an Isur D'rabanan, he's violating an Isur Dearest, Malkus. And yet throughout Gemara, it's only Makas Mardus, rabbinical lashes, if Chachamim give, and which is much less, and it's a whole different, much more lenient. Frek the Ramban, why do we say by rabbinic prohibition, if you have a suffix, no sweat, be mekel? What do you mean? You're dealing with a deraisa, and the rule should be, it's a deraisa issue. You got to be machmir. So the Ramban therefore disagrees with the Rambam's premise, and the Ramban says, yeah, there are 3 elements of Torah Shebaal Peh. Only the first 2 are biblically backed. If the Beis Din HaGadol of Yerushalayim is telling you they have a tradition going back from Moshe, if you refuse to accept that, then you violate an Aseh and a Loisaseh. Or if the Chachamim, the generation, are mafarish, they explain the Torah the way they see fit, and they reach a certain halachic conclusion, and you don't like it, and if you go against it, you become a Zokin Mamre, you get killed. That's biblical. But when the Chachamim say their own ideas, their own mitzvahs, their own isurim, says the Ramban, if you play with that, you b'chlal don't violate the deraisa. That's the Ramban's take. So the Rambam, it seemed like a pretty extreme argument. The truth is, even the Rambam, there's someone who goes further than him. The Bahag, the Baal Halachas Gedolos, right, centuries before the Rambam, and a chunk of the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvos of Yisharoshim is, he's taking issue with some of the Bahag, particularly the Bahag counts certain rabbinic mitzvahs part of the 613. Chanukah Megillah is part of the 613. How in the world does that make sense? How could Chanukah be part of the 613, right? The Jews didn't even have it for who knows how many years. So the Bahag says, God says you have to listen to the Chachamim. Whatever the Chachamim say becomes God's direct instruction. It's as if God said, the Chachamim become God's spokesperson. What they decide, that becomes the will of Hashem. Biblical. And there really could have been more than 613 mitzvahs. Had the Chachamim decided to add more, there would have been more. And before Chanukah and Megillah, maybe they were less revolutionary. The Rambam says, no. The Rambam says that's a little too far. Can't be. The Eibush is not asking you to bench Chanukah licht. But the Rambam says, the Eibush says, listen to the Chachamim. And if they told you to bench Chanukah licht and you don't, the Eibush's problem with you is not that you didn't bench Chanukah licht. It's that you didn't listen to the Chachamim. So you have like three stages over here. The Bahag says, if you don't like Chanukah licht, God says, I asked the Chanukah licht, where's your Chanukah licht? The Rambam would say, no, the Eibishter doesn't ask for Chanukah licht. It's the Chachamim who said that. But in general, everything the Chachamim say is backed up by the Psukim in this week's Parsha. Loi Sasser and Va'asisa. So if one does not do the Chanukah licht or other Mitzvos D'rabanan, the Eibishter will have a taina to you. Not about the particular mitzvah, that's not his business. But the general fact that you disregarded the words of the Chachamim. And the Ramban is a tier below, where the Ramban says that no, b'chal, you don't violate a deraisa at all. Okay? So far we're so good. Like everything in Torah, it's not very pashut at all. Because you'll probably wonder, according to the Ramban, why b'chlal do I have to do a d'rabanan then? According to the Ramban, why do I have to listen to the Chachamim as far as the third element of the oral law? When Chachamim create their own mitzvahs, their own prohibitions, why do I have to listen to them? If it's not backed up by this was Parsha, so why do I have to? Because they said, but why do I have to listen to them? That's a big problem. So, and also according to the Rambam, is it true anytime someone violates a d'rabanan, they're violating a deraisa? Like the way we presented it, is it as literal as that? And the answer, of course, is no. Quickly take a look with me with look in number 1. On the sheet, we don't have too many. So by the way, as I said, this is just way of introduction. We're building over here. We're on, and with a solid infrastructure, Mitzvah Shem will be very clear to, when we get to our particular issue, when the opinions split. Okay, look in number 1. It's a Gemara in Shabbos about the candles of Chanukah. What bracha do you make? You bench asher kiddushana b'mitzvosa v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. You make a bracha that the Eibishter instructed us. He sanctified us with his mitzvahs. V'tzivanu instructed us to light the candles of Chanukah. So frek the Gemara, every Chanukah, you start Chanukah with a lie. V'heichon sivanu, where did God say? Rav Avia Omar, he says, Miloi Sasser, God did say in this week's parsha. God said you have to listen to the rabbis. Rav Nechemia Omar, in Parshas Hazina, Sha'alo vichov yagedcha zekenecha v'yemolach, ask your fathers, they will tell you, and your Zaydas. And there's a discussion why Rav Nechemia chose that pasuk instead of Loi Sasser. But you see maybe where the Bahag comes from. The Bahag says, the Gemara says black and white, that Loi Sasser is telling you, God told you to light Chanukah licht. Like a simple Balabatish reading of the Gemara would lead you to the Bahag. The Gemara asks, where did God say light candles? Loi Sasser. That's where God said light candles. Now you'll add, according to the Bahag, so then what's with Loi Sosifu you can't add to the Torah? According to the Bahag, the Chachamim, anything they add gets added to the tally of mitzvahs. Right? I mean, they made it 613, it wouldn't have been. What's with that? So the Bahag is going to have to say that who said that if you add a mitzvah to the Torah, you're over Baal Tosef? You know when you violate Baal Tosef, what examples did Rashi bring in Chumash earlier, a couple parashas ago? Within one mitzvah, you don't want to have tefillin with 4 parashas, but 5, or an extra bracha by Birchas Kainim. The Bahag will say, if you take a mitzvah from the Torah and you start adding to it and saying this is how it has to be done, but stam to add a separate mitzvah, the Bahag would say it's not a problem. And that's what the Chacham did. What? He's not the only one. There's others that learn. The Rambam holds any mitzvah you add, you're over Baal Tosef. But many disagree with the Rambam. Fine. How will the Rambam learn this Gemara? I'll tweak it a little bit. The Rambam will say, God never asked you to bench Chanukah licht. God said, Loi Sasser. And God means that you have to listen, even the mitzvahs the rabbis give you. And if they said Chanukah licht, you got to do what they say. So the text of the bracha is not a lie. Hashem did command us to bench Chanukah licht. Because if I don't do this mitzvah, God will scream at me. He'll challenge me and say, he won't say why you didn't bench Chanukah licht, because the details don't concern him. He'll say, why did you disregard the command of the rabbis? But how will the Ramban learn this Gemara? How will the Ramban learn this Gemara? According to the Ramban, Loi Sasher has nothing to do with the mitzvahs of the Chachamim. Only the first 2 elements of the Arula, not the third. Yes, Rabbi Teitelbaum. Yeah. I don't know what's with that puzzle. What about it?
You have to listen to the Sefer within your day.
Yeah, the Sanhedrin of your generation.
Why is that one?
Not with regards to stuff that.
What isn't that possible in this passage?
But that are you talking about Rav Nechemia about Sha'ala Vicha v'Yagedcha? Yeah. So Loi Sasser, that's Rav Avia. Loi Sasser is part of the Loi Sasser discussion. So what's Ramban going to do with that? Like, how's Ramban going to read the Gemara? So you're going to have to say, well, let me show you another Gemara and see. Look at number 2. A Gemara in Brachas, number 2. A Gemara in Brachas, Taf Yud Tes. It's talking about Kavod Habrius. Human dignity. What rights, what halachas can be discarded, temporarily pushed away, violated for the sake of human dignity? Does Kavod Habrius warrant a violation of halacha? So the Gemara quotes a brayso that Kavod Habrius is so great, it pushes away a loy saseh shebetayra. It pushes away a biblical prohibition. So the Gemara wants to prove that if somebody's self-respect is at stake, and the only way to uphold his dignity would be to violate a deraisa, is allowed to. So that's the brayso. So frek Gemara v'amai, why? Lema, there's a pasuk in Mishlei, ein chochma, ein tvuna, ein eitzel neged Hashem. When God's will is is at stake. There's no chachmas, there's no tfunus, there's no tricks, nothing else matters. So why would it be that your dignity can allow you to violate the deraisa? So Tirgum Rav Bar Shvo Kamed Rav Kana. Rav Bar Shvo said the Bryce is talking about a specific loisasa, the love of loisasur. The Bryce is talking about not the 365. No one would ever say you're allowed to violate a loisasa for your dignity, but loisasur you could. You could violate the issur of not listening to the rabbis. Hold on, achichu alei. So they laughed. They laughed at Rav Bar Shva Nebuch. He gave a pshat, and they all laughed at him. Lav de loisasur deraisahi. Loisasur is one of the 365. Loisasur is biblical. Like, why would you allow to violate that and not other things? Why is it it's a chopped liver? It's also biblical. So Amar Rav Kana, the Rebbe Rav Kana said, Gavra Rabba Amar Milsa, if a great man said something, Loi sachichu alei, don't laugh at him. Kol mili d'rabanan as mechinu alav de loisasur. Meaning the explanation was like this. Those that laughed thought that Rav Bar Shvo was saying, personal dignity, human dignity can allow you to violate, you know what? Whenever Chachamim interpret a pasuk, right, the second element of the oral law. So they laughed and said, that's violating a loisasa like any other loisasa. So Rav Kana says, no, the pshat's like this. He's talking about the third element of the oral law. Mili d'rabanan. Mili d'rabanan means the Chachamim's own ideas, their own mitzvahs, their own takonas. Asmechinu, they latched it on, they hinged it on the loisasa of loisasur. Asmachta usually means Chachamim find the pasuk, they hinge it on the pasuk, but it's not the real meaning of the pasuk. So we're talking about rabbinic prohibitions, which this is the third element, their own mitzvahs, their own takonas. They hinged it on loisasur, but it's not really loisasur, and therefore these actions are different than biblical prohibitions. Umishum kvoide sharabanan. The Chachamim allowed it when human dignity is at stake. A simple reading of the Gemara is that the Ramban is right. That Mili d'rabanan, the Chachamim's own idea, is the third element of Torah Shebaal Peh, is only an asmacht, is hinged on loisasur. But loisasur really doesn't stand behind it. And therefore these prohibitions are just rabbinic. They're not biblical. And over here is where we say that kavod habrius can allow you to do away with them temporarily for your dignity. Fine. That's what so this would indicate a proof to the Ramban, right? Rashi happens to write on the Gemara in Brachos. Rashi happens to write on the Gemara in Brachos, just like the Rambam, that the Chachamim's own prohibitions are fully backed by loisasur. He says what Rav Kana's response was that since the Chacham made the prohibitions, they're taka backed up by loisasur mamash. But since they made the prohibitions, they created them with the caveat that should it come head to head with kavod habrius, they're gonna be meichel. They'll be meichel. That's how Rashi learns the Gemara. So in fact, Rashi learns the Gemara like the Rambam. Even though simple reading would be like the Ramban, Rashi wants to explain it in the view of the Rambam as well. So hold on. So let's just clarify something over here. Although the Rambam seems to be pretty clear that all rabbinic inyanim are mamash backed up by the Torah, and every time you're dealing with the d'rabanan, it's really a deraisa. That's what would seem. Not so fast. The Mabit, the great Mabit, Tzvas, the 1500s, Moshe ben Yosef Trani. The Mabit believes in his work Kiryas Sefer on the Rambam, that the Rambam is only referring to if somebody violates the Rabbanans as a moirid, casting them away, rebelling, doing away. Not if it's l'tei oven, not if I know the rabbi said, but I can't hold myself, I have a taiva. Right, we know in Gemara there's lahachis and l'tei oven, when someone violates to anger God. Or no, I'm not waging a war here. I'm not doing a jihad. But I just, I can't hold myself back. Hold on, Rabbi. We'll get there in a moment. So according to the Mabit, and the Steichemet brings this and talks about this, and the Lechem Mishnah brings this, that it could be the Rambam holds you only violate the Loisoso on a rabbinic mitzvah if you do away with it. As a moirid, you rebel. But if it's just, privately, someone just loves chicken and milk, he has to have that turkey burger, chveis. So then if it's, the Mabit believes the Rambam would hold you're not over the Dearest. So according to him, the Rambam is not mamish as advertised. The pre-Megadim, I didn't get this on the paper, but Rabbi Yosef Tu'umim, Rabbi Yosef Tu'umim, he was born in 1727, So he's about 20 years older than the Baal Shem Tov, roughly. Older than the Alter Rebbe, roughly. And the Alter Rebbe said about him, there was an announcement in heaven, the halacha follows the pre-Megadim. Rabbi Yosef Tu'umim wrote the pre-Megadim on Orach Chaim and Yeridea. And there's actually, he was stuck on funds. Paper was expensive, ink was expensive, so he wrote extremely terse. He wrote extremely bekitzer. It was expensive. You want to elaborate? It's going to cost. It's going to cost money. It's going to cost, so he had to be mekatzer. And the Mogen Avram also was so poor, he wrote part of his commentary in the walls of his house. He wrote on the walls of his house, right? They say if you see a kid writing on the wall, he's destined for greatness. If only teachers would look at students that way. If only the principal would look at the student that way. If it's a potential Mogen Avram. But the Avnei Nezer writes to somebody that I don't learn Pri Megadim. I don't really learn Pri Megadim. He writes in a letter, and he says why? He says that the words of the Pri Megadim, it's very cryptic and concise. You can't just skim over it. You have to read each word. You have to every word, every few words, every line are bombs. And he says, I'd rather just learn Shas and the Rishonim where I can get a lot more bang for my buck. By the Pri Megadim, you have to spend a lot of time to learn a small shtickle. So he says, I don't really learn the Pri Megadim. That's what he writes in a letter. Yet, there is a Maisa that the great Avnei Nezer once walked into the room of his father-in-law, the Kotzker, right? The Avnei Nezer, Rabbi Avram Bodenstein, Avremele Sochetchover, as he later became known. So he married the daughter of Reb Mendel of Kotzk. Now the Kotzker spent like the last 20 years of his life behind closed doors almost. And there's a lot of history behind that. The Avnei Nezer got married to the daughter during that time. During the time when the Kotzker was kind of off limits from the public. But for the son-in-law, the door was always open. For the son-in-law, the door is always open. And at one point, the Avnei Nezer says that he walked into the room of his father-in-law. He wanted to discuss learning with his father-in-law. And he sees an old man with his shver, with the Kotzker Rebbe. A man the Avnei had never seen before. Never saw him. And he sees that the two of them are conversing and learning. And then they see the Avnei Nezer's there. So they stop, and the Avnei Nezer starts saying his pulpul that he prepared, whatever, and they both listen. And afterwards, the Avnei Nezer left, and he sees that the old man and his shver continue their conversation. So later he asks his shver, who was that man? Never saw him before. And you don't let, people didn't really, at that point in time, people weren't visiting the Kotzker. So the Kotzker said, that was the Pri Megadim. There's a reason you never saw him before. That was the Pri Megadim. And the reason you were zeicher to see him is because you were just harving, you were just delving deeply, sweating over a piece of the Pri Megadim. So in recognition to that, he had the merit of seeing him. So which means he did at some point harv of Pri Megadims. maybe that's from that experience he knows that you can't just, you have to hard it, you have to toil and sweat. So later in life, he writes a letter to somebody that, I don't really learn Pri Megadim. But the Alter Rebbe quotes him, even though they were almost contemporaries. Alter Rebbe quotes him. Alter Rebbe had a lot of respect for him. The Pri Megadim knew the Barditchever. The Pri Megadim had spent years in different places, passed away in Frankfurt, not the Main, but the Oder, on the east of Germany, is where he lived the last couple of years of his life as Rav. The Pri Megadim spent time at the Barditchever, and he apparently said that in front of the Barditchever, I feel like a guy that comes into Shul on Yom Kippur and lights a candle for the Yidden that are davening, and is overwhelmed by the Kedusha. That's how I feel in front of the Barditchever. So he was a very humble man. And I'll just say one. When he was traveling around the Pri Megadim to get haskamas for his sefer, approbations and funds, so he came to the city, I think it was Yaroslav, where the Yeshuas Yankiv, Rabbi Yankiv Orenstein, the Yeshuas Yankiv, one of the große Goinim 200 years ago. So the Yeshuas Yankiv was a great mafalful. He loved pilpul, real sharp learning, deep learning, charifas, sharpness. And he was there, the Yeshuas Yankiv, living by his shver. And the Pri Megadim comes to town. The Pri Megadim showed him his works. And the Yeshuas Yankiv didn't give... he wasn't impressed. Too basic. He found it too basic. It's like, where's the spark? Where's the pilpul? Where's the glitz? And the Pri Megadim had tremendous chalishas hadas. Now he was belittled. So he went to another town where he met the father of Reb Naftali Ropshitzer. Reb Mendel Rubin was his last name. And he told the Rav, he was the Av Bezin there, he told Reb Mendel Rubin about, the the patch that he got in Yaroslav. So Reb Mendel Rubin told him that I bench you that your sefer will never leave the table of a Rav. And his sefer will never go on the table of a Rav. The fact is today, the Yeshuas Yankiv is around, but how many people are using it? When you give a shir and you want interesting Makairis, you find the Yeshuas Yankiv. But as Psak, the Pri Megadim has been, a Rav doesn't pass him without knowing a Pri Megadim. The Yeshuas Yankiv is considered exotic.
You like the Svardim?
Mm-hmm. He liked this one?
You like the Svardi way of...
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Yeah. But he doesn't write like some of the other Sfardim. He writes very terse, very bekitzer. In fact, at the end of his own life, the Pri Megadim was trying to read his own works and he couldn't make sense of it. Now, I don't know if there was something with his eyesight or partially it was so bekitzer, he couldn't remember exactly what his kavanah was. But we know that similarly, that Tzemach Tzedek, when he was older, that Tzemach Tzedek had something in his eye and it was hard for him to see. And he was reading one of his own tshuvas. And that Tzemach Tzedek said, what happened to the Pri Megadim is happening to me. I can't even read my own tshuvas. And he started crying. And with all the tears, the thing that was in his eye fell away. And he was able to see. Azoi Gate the Maisa. Anyhow, back to... So the Pri Megadim says, so he wrote something called the Psicha Kailelis, a general introduction to Torah Shebaal Peh. Absolutely remarkable work. And in the first chelik, in paragraph number 40, he says like this, and I read to you because I knew you wouldn't believe me. He says, even the Rambam who says that all of the Chachamim's own ideas are backed up by the two mitzvahs in this week's parsha, Loisasa and Vasisa. He said that's only when the Chachamim create a safeguard to the Gedorim of Torah. When Chachamim create a mitzvah which is to be a safeguard to the Torah, then even though it's the third tier, it's the third element of Torah Shebaal Peh, it comes own ideas, but if it's to protect the Torah itself, then God stands behind it. But Ner, Chanukah, and Megillah, and Mitzvahs, which are not protecting the Torah, he says, I think the Rambam agrees that they're not backed by Lois Osir. That's what he writes. That's what he writes. So in other words, the Rambam's opinion is a bissel vague eichet. The Mabit says it's only backed up by the Dearest if you violently are moired pyric oil. But if it's just out of taiva, you don't violate the Dearest. And according to the Pri Megadim, it's only those words that the Chachamim said on their own ideas, but it's a clear safeguard for the Torah, only that. Very interesting.
There's more than 3 categories?
The third category has to be split, just like according to the Mabit.
But still 3.
In general, there are 3, but you make more. Even the Ramban is nicht azoi pashut. The Ramban seems to say the entire third category, the Chachams, Mitzvos, the Takanas, all of that is not backed up by Lois Osir. Because the Ramban writes in Parshas Voes Chanun, by Lois Osifu, the Ramban says you can't just add mitzvahs to the Torah. But says the Ramban, but when the Chachamim do it, the Torah says you have to listen to them. The Ramban writes in Parshas Voes Chanun that when the Chachamim add a mitzvah, the Torah itself allowed them to add the mitzvah. The Torah is mitzvah us to listen to them. So he clearly says that even the Chachamim's mitzvahs are backed up by Lois Osir, which would be indicated by number 1 on the sheet, that when you make a bracha on Ner Chanukah, God told us to do it by saying Lois Osir. And we actually, according to Ramban, the mitzvahs of the Chachamim have nothing to do with Lois Osir. But in Parshas Voes Chanun he says it does. So the Ramban's opinion as well is, it seems to be an often a stira. So, okay, very quickly to say like this. The fact that the Eibishter says Lois Osir on the first 2 elements of Torah Shebaal Peh teaches us that in general he cares about what the Chachamim say. And therefore comes Rab Shimon Shkop and he says there's a svara that when Chachamim give a mitzvah, God would want us to follow it. The fact that he stands behind the first 2 parts of the Torah Shebaal Peh. So if they would give their own mitzvah, the Eibishter would want us. So what the Gemara meant in number 1 is, since there's Lois Osir by some D'rabanan, you see that Bechlal, the Eibishter commanded us to listen to the Chachamim, right? So therefore, when they give a mitzvah as well, it's not just who are you, John the Kamleti telling us to do something. It's kind of, we are people who, concerning other things we say, we're backed up by Lois Osir. So that's how the bracha would make sense. But also you see that God's desire that what the Chachamim say should be taken seriously. So says Reb Shimon Shkop, it's a svara, it's a logic. Okay? And with that, we move weiter. So, fine. The fact is, the Chachamim made many mitzvahs, many takanas, many decrees, many safeguards. What power exactly do the Chachamim have? They can make a mitzvah, they can tell you not to do something, fine. But can they actually tamper with the words of Torah itself? If the Eibishter says, I want you to do a mitzvah, can Chachamim say, we don't want you to do the mitzvah? Right? Until now, we're saying, Chachamim want to add things. They want to add a mitzvah, add a takana. They want to prohibit something. You asked about Baal Tosef. The Rambam will say very simple. The Rambam says that even though the Chachamim's ideas are generally backed up by Lois Osir, but they're not telling you that this is from the Chumash. They're open and telling you this is our idea, but God says you have to listen to us. So that's not an issue of Baal Tosef. Baal Tosef is when you clearly say these things are biblical. That's what the Rambam says. But if you're open, you're honest, intellectually honest, these are our ideas, then even though God stands behind, it's not Baal Tosef. You're very clear that these are our ideas. But, what? Mitzvos D'rabanan. Fine. So this is all when Chachamim are adding. They want to prohibit something, fine. But can they tamper with the Torah itself? Of course.
Contradict.
Rosh Hashanah, which falls on Shabbos, God says blow shofar. Chachamim say, don't blow. You may carry. Sukkot on Shabbos, don't shake lulav and esrog. Even the first day, which is Dearest, Ken Yerushalayim, all 7 were Dearest, all 7 days. But generally, the first day is Dearest. If it falls on Shabbos, Chachamim say, don't do the mitzvah.
It's a siyog.
They're concerned we might break Shabbos, but because of that concern, they're telling us not to do a mitzvah Dearest. God says, do it. Chachamim say, don't. This is a whole different story. This is a whole different story. What?
They're not stop waking up one day and saying,
They have a valid reason, yeah. But this is already
They're not saying keep Chanukah instead of Sukkot.
correct. But God says do something. They're saying don't, because you may come to do an aver. What happened to Ein Sofek Moitzi Midei Vada? I have a certain mitzvah here. You tell me don't do it because maybe something will happen. Okay, the maybe is a big Chilul Shabbos is very serious. It's not just a small concern. It's a concern of an Isra Skila breaking Shabbos. And a mitzvah's essay is much weaker than Shabbos, right? So,
The argument is Vada.
for, right. But for it, the fact is that Chachamim have the power to this is called tampering with the Torah, is it not? God said do it, they say don't. The Gemara in Yevamos, a famous sugya, and Daf Tzadik, over there, the Gemara brings a whole list of things, okay, and a couple important examples. Oral, Hazah, Izemel. Right? What are these things? An oral, if a goy becomes a Jew, he converts, it's Erev Pesach. The Chachamim said that when a goy becomes a Yid, he needs to have Tara. He needs to have real Tara. He has to have Tara from Paraduma Tara. They were concerned, Chachamim were concerned, that if a goy is Megayer, really he wasn't Tomei as a goy, right? So he just needs to go to mikveh, and he's Megayer for Erev Pesach in the morning. He can do Korban Pesach that night. But you know what he's going to think? I've been touching dead bodies for 20 years, and all I had to do was go to mikveh. So next year he might become Tomei as well, while he's a Jew, where he needs Parah Aduma ashes, and he'll think, well, last year I just went to mikveh. I'll go to mikveh again. So to make sure it doesn't happen, right, he has to have the ashes of Parah Aduma. The Chachamim mandate that. And even though the Torah says he converted, let him do the Korban Pesach. Chachamim say, because of our concerns, he has to wait a week. We don't allow him to do the Korban Pesach. The case of Izemel is a knife. You have a kid who's supposed to have a bris. The bris is on Shabbos. We forgot the knife. But the knife is in a Carmelist. It's only rabbinic prohibition to bring it here. The Eibishter says, do the bris milah. It's the 8th day. Chachamim say you can't carry from a Carmelist to indoors on Shabbos. Chachamim said, too bad. We are ma'amid our words. Hemidu divreim b'makom kares. They were ma'amid their words, and even though we're dealing with the mitzvah of milah, which has kares, Chachamim say we mean business. We mean business.
This is different because it's not even a siyog.
The siyag of not carrying from a Carmelist to indoors.
Is this a siyog?
Yeah, sure. But and because of that, they said we do not want. You're going to forfeit the mitzvah of milah bismana. Fine. And yeah, so there are. So this is a fact. Chachamim have the power to do that. Chachamim have the power to do that. The Ritva believes the power the rabbis have to prevent us from doing a mitzvah deraisa is only if they don't cancel out the mitzvah entirely. Rosh Hashanah, right, falls on Shabbos. Why don't we blow shofar? You may carry. So many Rishonim ask, then every Rosh Hashanah, you should never blow shofar. You're not allowed to play musical instruments on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shema Yitaken Klishir. You could do a doiraisa of fixing an instrument.
It's true.
What, there's a general Isur D'rabanan, you can't play with instruments because you might violate a deraisa of tikkun klishir of musical instruments. So they all ask, if you can't blow shofar when it's Shabbos because you may carry, never blow shofar Rosh Hashanah, you could break Yom Tov. She'll say breaking Yom Tov is only a loisase, Shabbos is skilla. Maybe we're only concerned by skilla. Right? The Ritva says, I have a simple answer. Chachamim's power to tamper with the Torah, to have us refrain us from fulfilling a mitzvah, is not if it dismisses the mitzvah entirely. So shofar on Shabbos they could say don't do, but shofar b'chlal they can't dismiss. That's the Ritva's take. The Taz has a famous rule. We once had a shir about this about 4 years ago, that anything which the Torah says clearly, the Chacham cannot tamper with. Eating milk with chicken, the Torah never explicitly allowed. The Torah said you can't have a gedi, right, a goat, but chicken, mamela is okay. Something which is only permitted, mamela, the Chachamim are allowed to prohibit. But whatever the Torah explicitly allows, says the Taz, Chachamim cannot tamper with. And therefore the Taz says, if Chachamim would say you could never blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, right, because you may be masak and you'll fix a musical instrument, but God said it's Yom Teruah, today to blow. They can't go against it. They can tamper with Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, because that the Torah never clearly spoke about. That's the Taz's famous rule.
The Torah says blow. Blow shofar.
The Torah never said clearly blow if it falls on Shabbos. So Chacham could say, right. That's the Taz's famous rule. Anyhow, so these are just examples of astringencies, restrictions. Chachamim's hands are sometimes tied, right? The Taz asked the famous shaila, why do we do bris milah on Shabbos? Why are we afraid you'll carry the baby outside, you'll carry a knife, just like we don't blow shofar or shake lulav, what? Right? So the Taz says, hold on, the Taz says, no. When it comes to bris milah on Shabbos, the milah itself is considered a violation of Shabbos. Chayvul, you're extracting blood, and it's a tikkun, you're violating Shabbos. So why b'chlal are you allowed to do a bris milah on Shabbos? The Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos, because ubayoy mashmina yimol b'sara lasoi, there's extra letters or words there which teaches me no matter what, on the 8th day, even if it's Shabbos. So the Torah went out of its way to tell you, I want the bris to happen on Shabbos if it's the 8th day. Without the pasuk, you'd say you can't. It's a violation of Shabbos. A bris milah is a mitzvah saseh, but Shabbos is an aseh and a loy saseh, right? An essay can't push away a loy saseh and an aseh, right? So the Torah had to say mufurish, or with a remez, or clear remez at least, that it's okay to do it on Shabbos. So says the Taz, once God said you're allowed to do it, Chachamim, the buck stops there.
Had it been a remez for
On Shabbos, a strong remez. Problem, but by shofar fakert, it says zichron true, which is a remez that on Shabbos you only talk about it, you don't do it. So anyhow, so these are just examples of Chacham's hands being tied behind their back. Certain things they can't do. But tonight's discussion is the following. You ready? Now we're at the penthouse. Okay, we took the elevator. So we know we're... Tonight's discussion is like this. The Torah says, I want you to do a certain mitzvah. And Chachamim formulate the manner through which you fulfill the mitzvah. Birchas Hamazon, the mitzvah minat Torah to bench. How much do you have to say? Not much. Chachamim formulated the brachas. Shmoneh Esrei, the Rambam holds biblically you have to daven once a day. What do you have to say? Not much. Chachamim formulated the nusach. Kiddush on Shabbos. There are many mitzvahs where the final product, the way we have it, is a rabbinic formulation. But the essence of the matter is biblical. So the shaila is, Chachamim formulate a mitzvah d'oraisa. Is it their way or the highway? That now this becomes the only way to fulfill the mitzvah? Right? And if you don't do it in our fashion, you get no credit at all? It's even biblically, there's no other way? Or no, Chacham are saying this is how we want you to fulfill the mitzvah. If you don't do it this way, you don't fulfill it in our terms, but biblically you still fulfill it. This is the famous question of the Pri Megadim. And this is also found in his Psicha Kolelis, his general introduction in the third chelik. Look what he writes in number 3. What comes out from what I wrote before is call Mitzvos D'rabanan, all the things of the rabbis that they said by a mitzvah saseh, you got to do it in this fashion. So if somebody deliberately does not follow them, do I say af min ha-Torah lo yotza? Do I say that once Chachamim formulate the fashion through which the mitzvah should be done, maybe that becomes the only way to fulfill the mitzvah? And he gives an example. Look in the next line. An example: somebody who davens tefillas chai b'Shabbos. If somebody davens Shemona Esrei on Shabbos, okay. Friday night there's a mitzvah called Kiddush. Friday night there's a mitzvah called Kiddush. Zocher es yom haShabbos l'kadshay. Right, the Rambam writes Mitzvah D'rabanan, Kiddush and Havdalah, according to the Rambam. Many disagree by Havdalah, but Kiddush D'rabanan, you have to mention Shabbos. Zocher. Now, the Chachamim formulated that we do it twice. Once during Shemona Esrei, you say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos, and again ala kos on the cup of wine, the special bracha of Kiddush, and Kiddush b'mokum sudid has to be by the meal. So the shaila is like this: what if someone daven ma'ariv? So he said the bracha Mekadosh HaShabbos. So min ha-Torah, he was zocher yom HaShabbos l'kadshay. He sanctified Shabbos with words. And he mentioned Shabbos. He says, Yoysim and Torah. The Magen Avraham writes in Siman the Hilchos Kiddush that even today, that there's a mitzvah to do Kiddush on wine. That's only D'rabanan. But you still Yoysim the biblical mitzvah in davening. That's what the Magen Avraham says. But the Pri Megadim says, I'm not so sure. Maybe once Chachamim were masakin that you need the cup of wine, maybe that becomes the one and only way to fulfill the biblical mitzvah.
Is this different than the first category of the Rambam?
This is all this is when Chachamim are formulating how to do a mitzvah d'oraisa. This is part of the third element of Torah Shebaal Peh.
To be mefarish,
That was the second element. No, they're not being mefarish, they're being mesakin. No, when Chachamim said do it ala kos and not being mefarish, it's a takana. We want you to do it on wine.
Okay.
Right. The question is about once they say to do it that way, maybe that becomes the one and only way to fulfill the d'oraisa. Look what he says. He says, Mikol Makis, I'm not so sure. Once Chazal, Asmechu Akro, they said they said you got to do it with a cup of wine. And Kiddush b'mokum suda needs to be by the meal. Maybe that's the only way. And af min ha-Torah lo yotza. Maybe, says the Pri Megadim, once Chachamim say this is our way, the other option is the highway. That you can't go back to the original plan of God. It's been changed. Maybe this is also the power of Chachamim. They can tamper with the rules of the Torah when they want to add or formulate to an existing mitzvah. Maybe the final product that they formulate becomes the one and only way to fulfill the mitzvah. What?
Why we have the second Kiddush?
Structure it.
They want it to be ala kos.
No, why is it by day? Why do we have the second Kiddush?
Oh, by day? That's a Gemara Psachim, but exactly how important the Kiddush by day is. But the main Kiddush is by night. The main Kiddush is by night. Because you have a Suda by day. You have a Suda by day. The Karasa the Shabbos Einig. Before the Einig has to be Karasa. You got to call Shabbos before you have the Einig. So before the Shabbos day meal, Karasa, you want to make Kiddush. So this is the Pri Megadim's famous question. Now you're probably thinking, really, is it a serious question? You know, I don't know, if you would ask an average balabas, what would he think? I imagine most people would say, if Chachamim formulated a mitzvah in a certain way, so that's how they want you to do it. And if you didn't do it their way, so midrabanan you have a problem. But in Torah, you're still Yotze, like the Magen Avram writes about Kiddush. And yet the Pri Megadim seriously entertains a possibility that maybe not. So where does this come from? Where does this idea come from? So join me, number 4, Tzikmod in Brachas. Actually, before number 4. Before number 4. No, what?
Bahag says that
They become part of the Taryag.
yes, they're interpreting the
It becomes
That's the time part.
right. Yeah, well, according to the Bahag, right, it seems like all bets are off. But according to standard understanding, do they have the power? So, in the Seder HaDoros, he writes that in the times of the Rif, there were 5 Rabbi Yitzchaks, 5 famous Rabbi Yitzchaks. So this is the second generation of the Rishonim. Right, the first generation would be the Rif's teachers, Rabbeinu Hananel, Rav Nissim Gaon, Rav Shmuel Hanagid in Spain. Generation number 2, you have the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. There were 5 other Rabbi Yitzchaks then. 2 of them actually were Barei Plukta. They had issue with the work of the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Gaius, the Ritz Gaius, and Rabbi Yitzchak Alabalia. They were not fans of the Rif's work, the Rif's halachas, but there were 2 other Rabbi Yitzchaks who lived further away. One was in Bovel, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe, and the other was Rabbi Yitzchak al-Barceloni, from Barcelona. This Rabbi Yitzchak al-Barcelona is famous as the Elter Zayd of the Ramban. Zayd of the Ramban. But he is quoted in the Sefer HaEshkol as saying the following. Are you ready? You ready for this? I don't know if you're ready for this. You ready for this? All right, what's L'chaim? If somebody has a linen garment with 4 corners, hold on. Let's say you have a woolen garment with 4 corners. So Minat Torah, you're supposed to have tzitzis, which consist of white strings and blue strings. The tchelis, okay, we had a shiur years ago about the tchelis. There's a big debate in the Rishonim, how many of the strings, is it 1 out of 8, 2 out of 8, 4 out of 8, how many of the strings should be dyed with the tchelis coloring from the chilazon? And the tchelis needs to be wool. The chlal tchelis needs to be, that tchelis in essence is wool dyed with chilazon. If somebody's wearing a linen 4-cornered garment, he's also supposed to have white strings and tchelis strings. Now the white strings could be linen, but the tchelis strings in essence need to be wool. That's what tchelis is. It's tzemer, which is davu, it's savu, it's dyed with chilazon liquid. Right. So I beshatnas, a linen garment with woolen strings. So the Gemara in Yevamah says, but in Parshas Kiseitse we learned there's a juxtaposition of 2 psukim, Gedilim Ta'asel having tzitzis, and it says shatnez next to it. To teach you that shatnez is suspended when it comes to tzitzis. Aseh doicha loisasa. The mitzvah saseh of having the tchelis strings is doicha the loisasa of the wool on the linen. That's how it is biblically. Came Beis Shammai, and Beis Shammai says, we do not want to see anyone with a linen 4-cornered garment with tchelis strings. You could have the lavon strings made out of linen, but the tchelis strings you can't have. What do you mean? God allows it. Beis Shammai says, yeah, but what happens after the sun goes down? What happens at night? There's no more mitzvah. When it is somebody, you got to see there's no more mitzvah at night. So what are you doing? You're walking around with shatnez. You violate shatnez. So therefore, even by day, we don't want to see anyone walking around with tchelis on the linen garment. By day, the aseh pushes away the loisase. But you're asking for trouble. What's going to happen at night? Now, the Rambam's opinion is that, when the sun goes down, when it's night, tzitzis no longer exists. The Rosh holds the tzitzis mitzvah depends on the type of garment you have. If it's a garment you wear by day, it's even chayav at night. Ksus laila is exempt. The Rosh holds if it's night clothes, you're always potter.
So,
yeah, but
you eat milk, you might eat.
All right, don't try and make it. It's hard enough for Rabbi Taliban. It's hard enough. So, according to the Rosh, you'll have to say the concern is, if you're going to have the tchela strings on one type of linen garment, you'll end up having it on your pajamas, and that you can't have. You'll have to explain the Seira that way. The fact is, Beis Shammai said, we don't want to see any linen garments having tchelas. Beis Hillel disagreed. Halacha ka Beis Shammai. In this instance, halacha is back Beis Shammai. So if Beis Shammai would see someone, a frum yak, walking around at 2 PM with a big linen garment with tchelas, he wouldn't give me a shekach. He would scream at him and say, we don't allow this. We answered this. Comes Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Salon and says, once Beis Shammai doesn't allow it, you're not allowed to wear those strings by day. If you do, you get malchus for shatners. Biblical lashes for shatners.
Even day.
Yeah, even during the day, yeah. At night, there's basic, but during the day, the chiddush is during the day. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Salon said you get malchus for the... So it's very clear that he's saying that once Beis Shammai says that we don't want you to wear, they tamper with the Torah and they say it's our way or the highway. In other words, they remove the mitzvah. So the example we said before was by a mitzvah saseh, when Chachamim say we formulated this fashion, it's our way or the highway. But the flip thing would be by a prohibition. If Chachamim said we don't want you to do the mitzvah because of this and this concern, so they jump into the Torah Shebaal Peh and they rearrange the mitzvah. They rearrange the mitzvah. No more mitzvah by day. So if you're going to wear, said Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Salon, if you're going to wear the linen garment with the tchela strings, malchus, it's shatners, there's no mitzvah. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman brings from his Rebbe, Reb Chaim Brisker, there's another way to learn Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Salon. There's another way to learn. It could be, pshat is different. It could be that maybe Chachamim don't have the power to really tamper with the Torah. This is the question we're dealing with. Maybe Chachamim don't mamish have the power to say it's our way or the highway. Maybe the biblical mitzvah still remains. But once the Chachamim tell you not to do it, right, that means you're not supposed to do it. If you're not supposed to do it, the essay no longer pushes away the loisasa. You hear the chap of Reb Chaim Brisker? The way he's quoted by his Talmidim is that the essay could still exist, but since you're not supposed to do it, they don't want you to have the tchelos because they're worried you'll wear it at night, where there's no mitzvah and stam shatnez. So therefore they don't let you do it by day. Once they don't want you to do it by day, you're not supposed to be doing that mitzvah saseh. And therefore it does not have the capacity to be doicha the loy saseh. So you get malchus. I will tell you it's a bissel shver. Why? A famous toisus in Chulin. Listen to this. We know there's a rule. A mitzvah saseh pushes away a loy saseh. Fine. But if the prohibition is a loy saseh and an aseh, then an essay can't push it away. An essay can't push away a loy saseh and an aseh. Right? Like Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah saseh to keep Yom Tov. There's a mitzvah loy saseh of loy saseh kol malacha. A mitzvah saseh could never give you the right. The mitzvah of shofar will never allow you to break Rosh Hashanah. Because Rosh Hashanah, as a Yom Tov, it's a loy saseh, don't do malacha. And aseh to keep Yom Tov. And therefore, any particular mitzvah saseh does not have the power, does not warrant to push off to be doicha a loy saseh and aseh. Right? That's a fact. That's what Gemara says. An aseh cannot push away a loy saseh and an aseh. So here's Tosfos' shaila. What if somebody, in such a case, what if someone went ahead and he did the mitzvah saseh, and he broke, he fulfilled an aseh, but he breaks a loy saseh and an aseh? He wasn't supposed to do it. Does he get malchus? Tosfos says, I don't know about this particular question. Tosfos says no. Tosfos says you don't get malchus. You know why? Because In the prohibition you did, what did you violate? A loy sasa and an asay. The loy sasa has been neutralized by the mitzvah saseh that you fulfilled. So what did you violate? Just a mitzvah saseh. There's no malchus for violating a mitzvah saseh. Again, so Taisa says if you did perform a mitzvah saseh, violating a loy sasa and an asay, you weren't supposed to do it, but if you did, the loy sasa you violated was warranted. It was hutar, it was permitted through the asay that you fulfilled. What did you violate? An asay. No malchus. Why do you do bris? Because the pasuk says there's a pasuk that tells you you're allowed to. There's a special pasuk, right? So what do I see from this tesis? That even when you're not supposed to do the action, you can still set into motion the mechanism of asay doichalos asay. So Reb Chaim's briskas var is not so pashut. Reb Chaim briskas var was that once Chachamim say, once Beis Shammai, alocha kamoisam, that you're not supposed to have tchelis on the linen garment, so if you're not supposed to be doing it, and you do it, the essay can't push away the lav, not so fast. You see, Tosis and Chulin says nishtazay. Although you're not supposed to do the essay there, because it's at a cost of a lav and an assay, but if you do it, we still use the mechanism of essay doichalos assay, which means maybe the alternate understanding of Rabbi Yitzchak Abar Tzalona, of why the guy with the linen garment and the tcheila strings will get malchus, is because Beis Shammai Chachamim remove the mitzvah. They go into the gut, into the essence of the mitzvah, and they formulate how they want to fulfill the asay, or if they make a prohibition, they can tamper with the essence of the mitzvah. We don't want you to do it, and we remove the mitzvah. We remove the mitzvah. Rabbi Akiva Eger, okay, gets a lot of credit because in his Sefer Drush V'Chidush in Mareches Ches, he says the following. You ready for this? He's discussing a Mogen Avraham. Mogen Avraham in Hilchos Shabbos. Enabling a child to do prohibited activities and to enable, to give it to them. The Mogen Avraham says like this, that even if the item is prohibited, but there's some mitzvah element, it becomes justified. Like when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, let the kid blow shofar. Chacham said no, but there's chinuch, it's chinuch. So the chinuch element justifies us enabling the kid to do something which seemingly shouldn't be doing. Or, says the Mogen Avraham, Korban Pesach. Who can eat Korban Pesach? Only those that were appointed. The Menuyev. Ein nechol elam, you have to be appointed on. A kid is too young. A cotton is not nimna. So can he eat from the meat? Minat Torah, that meat is not fitting for him. Mogen Avraham says he can eat it. Chinuch! Chinuch! The chinuch, the positive chinuch aspect, the mitzvah aspect allows you to let the kid do something which on the surface should be outlawed. So comes Rabbi Akiva Eiger and says, those two examples are east and west. By the Korban Pesach, Minat Torah, that meat is not fitting for the kid. Chinuch! What a chinuch to do in Aveira. What a chinuch is that? Chinuch, that you should eat meat that you weren't nimna, that you weren't counted upon, that you weren't registered. You weren't registered on that meat. What type of chinuch is that? Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but if Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, first of all, Minat Torah, you're supposed to blow shofar. It's not like the Korban Pesach where that meat shouldn't be eaten by the kid. Here, we should be blowing. And not just that, he says, even when the Chacham said don't blow because you may carry, the mitzvah still remains. And therefore the kid, you're allowed to let him blow. Why? Etutepes is doing a mitzvah. By the Korban Pesach, etut naveda. By the Korban Pesach, getting the kid to do it. Here he's doing a mitzvah because even after Chachamim don't allow you to do the action, they don't blow it out of the park. The mitzvah, exactly, the mitzvah still remains. That's what Rabbi Akiva Eiger says. The Avnei Nezer also believes that Chachamim don't have the power to remove the mitzvah. He writes it in a very, very long letter. And he's actually taking the Tzemach Tzedek, Art Tzemach Tzedek, to task. But in it he writes that actually the case of the linen, the four-cornered linen garment with the tchelis, he says when the Chachamim said don't do the mitzvah, he doesn't quote Rabbi Yitzchak Kabar Tzaloni we said before, but he says when Chachamim say don't do the mitzvah, he says they don't have the power to remove it. The Avnei Nezer holds black and white just like Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Chachamim can tell you be passive and don't fulfill the mitzvah. They don't have the right to say that if you do it, it doesn't count. They don't have the right for that. And the way he words it is interesting, because the Gemara in Yevamah says, if it's Sheva al Tas, Chum say be passive. Don't shake lulav on Shabbos, don't shake shofar, right? Don't let the ger bring the carbon Pesach if he's Megarit, and don't carry the knife from the Carmelists. All of these are passive. Chum say Sheva al Tas, sit and don't act. But kum va'aseh, for Chacham to tell us to actively violate a deraisa, so the Gemara brings a whole debate, and the halacha we say that no, they only have the power passively, not actively, unless it's exceptions, or there are certain exceptions, but generally only passive. They don't have the power to actively tamper with the deraisa, only passively. Says the Avnei Nezer, if Chachamim would say, not only we don't want you to do the mitzvah, let's say with the linen garment and the chip, but if you do it, there's no mitzvah, he says that's called actively tampering with the deraisa. That's kum va'aseh. The Chachamim, for them to say that will be them actively tampering with the deraisa, they can't do that. That's the Avnei Nezer's take, just like Rabbi Akiva Eiger.
How is this different than the motion of Kiddush in the Pramagoga?
They'll hold like the Magen Avraham, who Taka says that the Chachamim added the cup, but they can't take away that you're yotzei just with words. Taka, Chacham don't have the power. No, the Pri Megadim, yeah, exactly, yeah, they won't buy into this, yes. So, the Avnei Nezer, okay, Rabbi Remele of Sachachov. So, he had a number of very great students. Not too many. Apparently, the Kotzker told him that you're not going to have a big oilam by you. Only the best students, the Avnei Nezer had the cream of the crop, top quality students. There was Rab Meir Don Plotsky, the Kli Chemda, famous Gaon, the Kli Chemda was a student of his. The Kuzha Glover Gaon, the Eretz Tzvi, was a student of the Avnei Nezer. There was a Rabbi Boyman, who was the first Rav in Los Angeles. He moved there in the early 1900s, like 1906, 1907 or something. Moved to Los Angeles. He was a student of the Avnei Nezer. So the guy was a Gaon, like a real serious lamdan, in the middle of Los Angeles. But those were the days when Hollywood was black and white and silent. So he passed away in 1910. Yes. Your father maybe. So, amongst the Avnei Nezer's great students was the Chelkas Yoyev. The Chelkas Yoyev. Rabbi Yoyev Weingarten, who was an incredible Gaon. He was only a few years younger than the Avnei Nezer, the Chelkas Yoyev. And he learned by the Avnei Nezer before the Avnei Nezer lived in Sachachov, when he lived in a different city earlier in his life. But he remained very close to him. In fact, he told us some stories that the Chelkas Yoyev was once learning with the Avnei Nezer together. Can you imagine? And the Avnei Nezer's son, the Shem Mishmul, the famous Shem Mishmul, was very ill. It was in the early days. He was a boy. The Shem Mishmul was under Bar Mitzvah. He was a boy. He was very ill. And the Avnei Nezer was learning with the Chelkas Yoyev. And all of a sudden, the Avnei Nezer's wife runs in, right? The Kotzker's daughter. And she tells her husband, our son is sitting Azay, and you're busy learning. Get up and do something. So he got up. He went over to his son, the Shem Mishmul, put his hand over his head, And all of a sudden, the color came to the boy's face, and mamash a miracle. And the Avnei Nezer said that be'emes, I didn't have to do that. The sitting and learning over here would have already have accomplished it. But my wife came, made a ruckus, and we stopped learning anyhow. So if I wasn't learning, so then okay, I'll go do something. I put my hand on the boy. But really, just sitting and learning. He actually told the Chelkas Yoyev, when are you going to become an Admur? And the Chelkas Yoyev said, become a Rebbe? And when a couple asks me for a bracha for children, what am I going to tell them? You could know Shas and Poskim, but how are you going to become a Rebbe? So the Avnei Nezer told him, there's a Gemara in Yevamis and an Amukah Yosef in Baba Kama. And the Chelkas Yoyev said, the Gemara in Yevamis, I know, it's Rabbeinu Chananel. But what's the Amukah Yosef in Baba Kama? He left, he opened the Baba Kama, he learned through all the Amukah Yosef. Didn't find it, didn't know what it was. So that secret wasn't given to him. But the Rabbeinu Chananel in Yevamis, that he knew. Go knock yourself out and find out what the meaning of that is. But the Avnei Nezer was telling him that you want to be a Rebbe and Poel Yeshuas, you don't need Kabbalah necessarily. Nigla, the power of Nigla, you could do it too. There was a kameya, an amulet, which was allegedly a highly effective amulet or kameya that was held in Yerushalayim, Eretz Yisrael, for generations. And the Kabbalah was, it came from the Taz. The Taz gave it to somebody, and it was passed down in the family. And a little while ago, they opened it up to see what did the Taz write in the amulet. And the Taz writes that the brachas invested in here is b'schus a toisvis that I understood thoroughly in Masechta Chulin. That was the whole power of the Kameah. That was the whole power of the Kameah.
Say which toisvis? There's magic in Miklim.
Without question. Without question. The Briskers say a story with the Beis Halevi that he was walking down the road and a Yid came and asked him, Rebbe, give me a bracha. The Beis Halevi was walking with his Mesharis or somebody who was talking and learning. So at first he said, no, I don't give brachas. But then he said, I'll give you a bracha. So the Mesharis afterwards, or whoever was accompanying the Beis Halevi said that Rebbe, you don't usually give brachas. What's up now? She said, Taka, that's why first I wasn't going to give. But then I thought to myself, it's not about me. You and I were just talking in Nigla this entire time. That creates a spiritual energy. Let the guy benefit. Let this be the power of the bracha that will help the guy benefit. Nigla itself. Anyhow, so the Chelkas Yoyev was a Talmud Muvik, was one of the greatest students, maybe the greatest student perhaps, of the Avnei Nezer. And the Chelkas Yoyev has a little kuntras called Kaba de Kushyasa, which is from Gemara in Yuma, which literally means a kav of pits, of the pits of a date. But he used it in reference of Kaba, Kuf Beis Aleph. Kav is a measurement, but Kuf Beis Aleph is Gematria 103, and Kashiaisa can refer to Kash's questions. It was a kuntras 103 questions. 103 questions that he wrote and he publicized. And actually Rab Grusman, who was a Rosh Yeshiva in Kfar Chabad, wrote a whole sefer answering all the questions. He wasn't the only one, a few people. And in question, I think it's in the Tzaddiks, I think it might be Tzaddik Tes, whatever, the Chelkas Yoyev quotes to Rabbi Akiva Eiger we mentioned before. Again, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that for the kid to blow shofar Rosh Hashanah Shabbos, Adarab, it makes sense, be mechanech him and teach him to blow. First of all, it's only the Chacham that said don't blow. But more than that, they didn't remove the mitzvah. The kid's doing a mitzvah. In contrast to when the kid's going to be get some of the lamb from the Korban Pesach when he wasn't registered on it, right? So the Chelkas Yoyev says, it's a pellet to me why Rabbi Akiva Eiger would have written that. He said, I can't understand. Of course, Chachamim removed the mitzvah. It's not even a shaila. He says, Chachamim, when they say don't do a mitzvah, if you do it, there's no credit. It's nothing. The mitzvah is completely out, like the Prima Godim wanted to say. So this became a major debate between the Avnei Nezer and... But no, this is God Amar. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amar v'heim Amru. So the Chelkas Yoyev, now he doesn't quote his Rebbe, the Avnei Nezer, but the Avnei Nezer is guns out in his, like Rebbe Kiveger, and the Chelkas Yoyev says, I don't see it that way at all. And he has the following couple of proofs. So join me very quickly. Let's do this quickly. In number 4, a Gemara in Brachas. When it comes to reading Kriya Shema, so Beis Shammai says in the morning you read it, Uvkumecha, you got to stand up. And at night, B'shachbacha, you got to lie down. Okay? So Beis Hillel says, no. Each person reads Shema the way you want. So Rav Yecheskel said, what if someone dafka follows Beis Shammai, he stands up in the morning or lies down at night? Also it works. If you follow Beis Hillel, it also works. Rav Yosef said no. If you read Shema according to the instructions of Beis Shammai, lo yosef v'lo klum, it doesn't count. Garnish, it doesn't count. And he brings a Mishnah from Masechta Sukkah. Someone who has his head and most of his body in a sukkah. But the shulchan is b'soich habayis. You're in the sukkah, Reish v'ruba in the sukkah, but your table is outside the sukkah. Beis Shammai pasel. Because what's going to happen when you think every spoon you're going to bring to your mouth, you're going to end up leaning out. Beis Hillel machsher. Beis Hillel says, no, if you think that you can eat it correctly, keep your head in the sukkah, you could do that. So it's a big debate. So Beis Hillel told Beis Shammai, don't you know the story? That the elders of Beis Shammai and of Beis Hillel went to visit Rabbi Yochanan ben Achronis, and they found him eating. He was head and most of his body in the sukkah. The shulchan was in the house, and no one said, Tim Jack, layam olay klum. So Beis Shammai said, Misham Raya, you're proving for the you missed the end of the story. Boy, they told him. They told him, Im kain ayisanoig like yamtus mitasukkum yamecha. They said to him, the Ziknei Beis Shammai said that you did not fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah in your life. So, Tosfos, in number 5 is a Tosfos in Sukkah Daf Gimel where he says very clearly, let's read the first number 5. To include a case where Beis Hillel is machmir, D'rabanan. Look at the third line. Kedivrei Beis Shammai, I'm sorry. That lo yotzei de chavosoi afilu doiraisa. That in the case of the sukkah, you're not yotzei even biblically. Like we find by Beis Shammai, if you sit at the entrance of the sukkah, there were geyser that maybe you might follow the table, so your head will pop out of the sukkah. And they said, such a sukkah is completely invalid. Afilu midoraisa loikim. Tosfos says, when Beis Shammai said, we don't want you sitting in the sukkah with your table outside, they didn't just prohibit that method of sitting in the sukkah, they invalidate the sukkah, not just in the eyes of the Chachamim, in the eyes of the Torah. The sukkah is no longer a sukkah. They tamper with the sukkah itself. It's similar to what Rabbi Yitzchak Abba Barcelona seems to hold by the Tchelis by the Sodom. In other words, Tosfos seems to be part of the group that believes the Chachamim can tamper with the kishka of the Mitzvah D'rabanan, and they could remove it at will. And it's removed even on a biblical level. If you look at number 6, another source is a famous Rabbeinu Yonah. In the beginning of Masechta Brachos, Chachamim and Rabban Gamliel have a debate. Rabban Gamliel says the word of B'shachbacha means say Kriya Shema as long as you're lying down, the entire night, till dawn. Chachamim say ad chatzos. So why they say ad chatzos? It's a safeguard. The Mishnah says clearly it was a safeguard. Because if you don't do it before chatzos, you'll say, oh, I have a whole night ahead, let me go to sleep. And you wake up, it's already past sunrise. But if you know you have till midnight, you'll do it before you go to sleep. So this is written by the students of Rabbeinu Yonah. They say, it seems to our teacher, the Rav Rabbeinu Yonah, Natzer Rachmano Parkim, may God protect him and deliver him, that the Chachamim hold, you know what the debate of Chacham Ram Gamliel is? It could be Ram Gamliel also holds that there's a safeguard by midnight. But he holds it's a lechatchila safeguard. If you missed it, no, you could do it at 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock a.m. as well. Whereas Chachamim hold, if you miss chatzos, the mitzvah's out the window. Shafilu kriyishma atzma, even kriyishma itself, which has been at Torah the whole night, you can't read it after chatzos. You can't do it. The Chachamim have the power to pater you from mitzvah saseh, as long as they do it for a reason, as a fence, or for the sake of the mitzvah itself, like he says by lulav. Minat Torah, you do it on the first day, but if it falls on Shabbos, don't do it because you might carry. Or by the linen garment with tzitzis, even though the Torah allows you by day to wear the tchela strings on the linen garment. Bachom said, don't do it. Beishamai says, don't do it. And then, because what's going to be at night? Because of the trouble you'll get into and you'll just violate the laws. Don't do it by day either. So Rabbeinu Yonah says, we have precedents of Chacham saying, don't do a mitzvah d'oraisa. So too, by Kriyishma, by Chatzos, they say after Chatzos, don't do it. You can't do it after Chatzos. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, I think the Chelkas and a number of Achronim believe that the Rabbeinu Yonah number 6 is the same as Tosfos in number 5. The Chacham removed the mitzvah. They removed the mitzvah. I saw the Ba'asher Weiss in Eretz Yisrael. He wants to disagree with Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. He believes this is no raya. Rabbi Yonah is just saying, after Chatzos, don't do it anymore. Just like we find Chachamim say, don't do mitzvah d'oraisa, don't blow shofar, Shon Shabbos, etc. They don't want you to do it. Now, why? They have a reason. Because in order for their safeguard of Chatzos to mean business, so they can't allow you to do it after Chatzos. Right? Or else it becomes a joke. There's a safeguard. If you missed it, no problem. So in order that the safeguard should mean business, they don't allow you to do it after Chatzos. But does that mean they removed the mitzvah? The Ba'asher Weiss believes there's no raya from here. He thinks the mitzvah still remains. Just Chacham, Rabbeinu Yonah is just saying that we find the Chacham say, don't do a mitzvah. Even when Hashem says do it. That's Tosfos. But who says Rabbeinu Yonah is going along with? That's what he says. To me, I'm not so sure. I find Rabbi Osher Weiss's taina hard to understand because here we're talking about, okay, it's 2 a.m, okay? Someone wants to read Shema. You're going to say, Chachamim, if the mitzvah really does exist, but Chachamim don't allow you to do it, why? So next time what? You did it 2 a.m. now, you'll do it 2 a.m. next time as well. Okay, what's the problem if you still yade some in Torah? Because next time, you won't even do it at 2 a.m., you'll wake up at 8 a.m. and where do we find in Gemara that the God says there's a mitzvah and Chacham say don't do it, not because there's a concern now, but a concern next time? Shofar and lulav on Shabbos, it's a concern right now. Sodin by the linen garment, it's you're going to wear it now, you wear it tonight, you're not going to take it off. Here,
Tonight. It's not now.
yeah, but what if you forget to take it off? We're worried you won't take it off. Here, the guy wants to read Shema at 2 a.m. If the mitzvah biblically exists, why are Chachamim saying don't do it? Because they want their safeguard to mean business. But God says do it. No, we don't want you to do it. Even if this guy will do the same thing for the next 10 years, so he'll read Shema every night at 2 a.m. The concern is maybe he'll miss the entire night. So because of a concern next time round, where you're worried he'll do something which he hasn't yet done, you're going to not allow him to do a current mitzvah d'oraisa? It's very hard to say that. In Yevamos does the mitzvah of Yibum apply with a woman who carries a loy sasa to you? The mitzvah essay of Yibum should push away the loy sasa. Let's say it's a brother's a Kohen Gadol and his brother passed away, so it's an almana, right? So it's a loy sasa for the Kohen Gadol. But the Yibum should push it away. So the Gemara says, Minat Torah, it would for the first cohabitation. The second cohabitation, there's already no more mitzvah. So you're just going to have a lav. So the Chachamim don't allow you to do the first cohabitation. They were guys of the first bia for the second bia. So by the first bia, God says do it. Chachamim say don't, because we're worried what's going to happen tomorrow night. But that's different, because we're worried that tomorrow night you do the same thing as tonight. Here, if the guy reads at 2 a.m. for the next 10 years, he'll always get the mitzvah. You're worried that one night he'll miss the entire night. You're worried for something in the future which is different than what's even happening now. I don't know. I find it very hard to look at Rabbeinu Yoina through the explanation of Basher Weiss. I think Rabbi Chanan Wasserman's take on it is much clearer, much brighter, that Chachamim potru, and they removed the mitzvah. They removed the mitzvah. So you have Rabbeinu Yoina, according to Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, saying this. You have Tosfos who says it. You have the Chelkas Yoyev, the Prima Godim, and on the other side, you have Rabbi Kiveger, the Avnei Nezer, very staunch that there's no such thing. And you have the Mogen Avraham who said it about a Kiddush, that the Chachamim don't have the power to say our way or the highway. They can make a prohibition, but the Mitzvah D'raisa will still stand. They can formulate a Mitzvah D'raisa, but if you don't do it in their fashion, you still get the biblical credit. That's the take of Rabbi Kiveger and the Avnei Nezer. But like we said, the Prima Godim is not so sure, and the Prima Godim talks about in a couple places. Listen to this. Okay, we're going to finish up, but listen to this. You ready? This is a whopper and a half. Rabbi Yosef Kair in his Kesef Mishnah has a well-known kasha. Kriya Shema by night, the mitzvah biblically is throughout the entire night. Uveshach Bocha means as long as you're sleeping. Not when you go to bed. That's Rabbi Eliezer, so he limits it to, the first portion of the night. But Rabbi Gamliel says B'shach Bocha means as long as you're lying down. Okay. What about by Kriya Shema in the morning? It says Uvkumecha. Uvkumecha could mean as long as you're up, so it should go an entire day. But we know that's not the case. 3 hours into the day, the mitzvah of Kriya Shema is out. Because Uvkumecha means when you get up. Why? Just like Uveshach Bocha is not when you lie down, it's while you're lying. Uvkumecha should not mean when you get up, it should mean while you're up. That's the Kesef Mishnah's kasha. And he answers, Taka Minat Torah, Uvkumecha means as long as you're up. Minat Torah Kriya Shema by day is an entire day. The proof is, the Rambam holds, if you read Kriya Shema, you could say the brachas of Shema 4 or 5 p.m. When it comes to Birchas Kriya Shema of the morning, there's 3 opinions in the Poskim how long you have to say it. Either 4 hours or Chatzoi, so the Rambam holds the entire day. Says the Kesef Mishnah says, the brachas you say by Shema, these are brachas on the mitzvah of Shema. How could you say it at 2 p.m. when you're not doing the mitzvah? It must be biblically the mitzvah exists the entire day. Where does 3 hours come from? The Chachamim wanted us to do it earlier in the day. And also you're supposed to do Shachris before 4 hours of the day, right? So they said Kriya Shema 3 hours. And they tied Shtuv Kumecha means when you get up, but it's not that they interpret it that way. It's not smachta. They hinged it on that.
It's the Kol Alma,
This is the Kesef Mishnahs? No, nobody agrees with him. Almost nobody. There are a few. The Mogen Avraham says, what? That means Kriya Shema, biblically, is a mitzvah essay not bound by time. Because the mitzvah by night is a whole night. The mitzvah by day is a whole day. And women should be chayiv. The Gemara says in Brachas, Davchav, black and white, that women are potter from Kriya Shema because it's a mitzvah essay bound by time. So frek the Mogen Avraham, what is the Kesef Mishnah talking about? How could the day part of the mitzvah be all day? That means the mitzvah is no longer bound by time. Women would be chayiv. The Gemara clearly says they're potter. What? Night's a whole night.
So it's not bound by time.
It's bound by day or bound by night.
It's the 24 hours. The mitzvah is circular. The mitzvah continues. So the Shagas Arya in Siman Yud Beis says that, he says they're both wrong. He says the Kesef Mishnah is wrong, but not because of the Kasha of the Magen Avram. He says that even if the day mitzvah goes a whole day, it's a different obligation than the night obligation. The two obligations don't mix and match. There's Kriyish Mishal Laila and Kriyish Mishal Yom. It's two different obligations. Each one's bound by 12 hours. That's his answer. You know what the Pri Megadim says? The Pri Megadim says that the Kesef Mishnah would tell you, back in the day, Kriyishma was not bound by time. But once the Chachamim said, you got to do it by 3 hours, they made it bound by time. They removed the mitzvah from the rest of the day. They made women potter. According to the Pri Megadim, at one point in time, women had to say Shema. But once Chacham were machmer on the men to get it done by 3 hours of the day, they removed, based on his theory that he presents here.
Like the Kesef Mishnah.
He's defending the Kesef Mishnah. Yeah. But he's going with his Yisai that the Chachamim have the power to remove a biblical mitzvah. Now, the obvious kash is, the Kesef Mishnah proved his point based on the psak of the Rambam. You're allowed to make the brachas throughout the entire day. You could say Avos Shalom at 3 p.m., but the Kesef Mishnah learns it's the bracha on the mitzvah of Shema. It must be still yaitz of the mitzvah. According to the Pri Megadim, once Chacham removed the mitzvah through most of the day from after 3 hours, the same way women are now potter because it's bound by time, you shouldn't be able to make the brachas. Like, how in the world does that work? He's going to have to say that since the Chacham were the ones that limited to 3 hours, when they did that, they still enabled us. They said, but as far as the brachas will allow you to make all day. You'll have to say some force interpretation like that. So the Pri Megadim is going with his theory. He's taking it pretty far. In number 7, the Minchas Chinuch discusses it as well. In number 7, it's in this mitzvah of Kiddush in Parashas Yisro, where he speaks about certain mitzvahs where, what do you have to say? Whatever you desire, the nusach of Kiddush, Birchas Hamazon, etc. But then he says, once Chachamim create the format of how it has to be said, look about halfway down in number 7. Now that Chazal will convey the nusach, and you don't do that, but you want to just get away with some simple wording, which back in the day would have worked, it could be today it doesn't work anymore. And he quotes Taiza and Sukkah, and he quotes the Pri Megadim that we said, that if you don't follow the ways of the Chachamim, at least deliberately, maybe you don't get credit even biblically. So the Minchas Chinuch also believes that there's this argument could be made of the Pri Megadim. So here's just the issue. In number 8, there's a rosh in the end of Masechta Pesachim. Okay? Let's do this outside. The Karasa l'Shabbos Oinig. Karasa make Kiddush, call out for Shabbos, and then have Oinig, have the meal. From there we see the Kiddush has to be in the place of the Suda. So what about making Kiddush in a shul where no one's eating? So the Rosh brings a debate between himself and Rabbeinu Yonah. He says, Rabbeinu Yonah says, go ahead with it. It's not a brachal of Atola. And he says why? In number 8 in the first line, because when we say that Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makom Suda, that Kiddush must be followed by a meal to work, that's rabbinically. But the biblical Kiddush, you don't have to have a meal. The biblical Kiddush still works. And therefore he says, you have people that don't know how to make Kiddush themselves, make Kiddush in shul for them, at least they'll be able to get the biblical Kiddush. And the Rosh doesn't like it. He says the words Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makom Suda is mashma. If there's no meal, there's no Kiddush. It doesn't work at all. So many explain what's the debate of the Rosh and Rabbeinu Yonah. It's the very question of the Pri Megadim. Rabbeinu Yonah holds when Chachamim said that Kiddush should be done by a meal, that's the Chachamim's. They enacted that. But if you don't have the meal, you can still get biblical, you can still do the Ikar Mitzvah Dearest. So at least give these people that. And the Rosh says no. Once Chacham formulate has to be by a meal, then there's no worth by doing the biblical version. It's no longer available. No, the problem is that Rabbeinu Yonah contradicts himself. Because in number 6, he's the guy that said by Shema, the Chachamim uprooted Shema. Once Chatzos comes, Chachamim said, you didn't follow us, boom, there's no more mitzvah. It's a contradiction of Rabbeinu Yonah. So Rabbi Asher Weiss wants to prove what he said, that in number 6, Rabbeinu Yonah isn't saying what we thought he was saying. He never said the mitzvah falls off. But according to Rabbi Chanan Wasserman's understanding, Rabbeinu Yonah mamish contradicts himself. What's going on?
He has a good reason for Shabbat.
So, right, okay. So my father, Zozain Gesund, has an explanation, and I hope I quote him correctly, and then Rabbi Asher Weiss himself says this as a possibility, that even if we accept this idea of the Prima Godim, the Chachamim can say it's our way or the highway, they don't always do that. It depends where, it depends when. If they're concerned about the fulfillment of the mitzvah itself, if they're worried about people trampling on the mitzvah or the mitzvah being degraded or disregarded, then in order to protect it, that gives them the right even to tamper with the mitzvah if it's for the sake of making the mitzvah great again. But if they're just adding to a mitzvah, they're just adding nice details and cream, exactly, then it doesn't make sense to say that if you don't do it our way, you don't get the biblical credit. Why would they tamper? So when it comes, let's say, to Shabbos, shofar on Shabbos, lulav on Shabbos, where they're worried Pasha for Shabbos is going to be broken, they're sure it's just a matter of time until someone carries on Shabbos. So although it's not the same mitzvah as the shofar lulav, but because they're worried for the sake of a desecration of a mitzvah, they can cancel one mitzvah for the sake of protecting another. So they can tamper with the essence of shofar and lulav on that day of Shabbos in order to protect Shabbos. Because all mitzvahs are one, we've spoken about that in the past, they're united, and therefore one mitzvah, can lose a limb to help protect another mitzvah. Or the case of Rabbi Yitzchak Habar Tzalani, when you have the linen and you have the tchelis. They will tamper with the mitzvah of tzitzis in order that it shouldn't lead you to wearing shatnez that night. Okay? But when it comes to kiddush b'makom suda, right? Although let's say kriyishman, right? Chacham say, if we're going to let you read it a whole night, you're going to go to sleep. Oh, I'll wake up at 4 a.m. You'll miss your alarm. You'll miss it. So they said chatzos. They're worried for the sake of kriyishman itself. So therefore, they felt, you know what? Desperate time calls for desperate measures. Drastic means are necessary. In order that the gzeira should be taken seriously, we're not going to allow you to fulfill the mitzvah after chatzos. The mitzvah's gone. For the sake of the mitzvah of kriyishma in the long run. But kiddush b'makom suda, why in the world would they say, if you don't have the suda, you can't fulfill the biblical fashion of kiddush? They just added a layer to it. It's not a safeguard to the kiddush. So they don't have the right, or they didn't want to tend and say, we're not going to allow you to be yaitze. For what reason? So Rabbeinu Yonah doesn't contradict himself. And that's also why in the Prima Godim that the mentioned, the Magen Avraham that the Prima Godim mentioned, about Shmoneh Esrei Friday night, if Minat Torah it's enough to say words, Chacham want you to do it on wine, but what are they concerned about that they would use such drastic measures that you no longer fulfill it just through word, which is the biblical fashion? They don't have a reason to say it. So the Magen Avraham therefore said over there, it's a Dover HaPashad, you'd still be Yaitse by Ma'ariv. Yeah, okay.